An identifier is a pointer to a location in memory. So if I do something like this, my bar is equal to 9, what that will really mean is that my bar will be just the pointer where 9 is stored in memory. I can check where that location address is by using the ID function. So if I do my ID of my bar, this will return the location address in my computer where that value 9 is stored. In this case, it's a Google Colab server. I can use the hex function to represent this value in hexadecimal representation, which is a more common way to represent location addresses. But really what my bar is just that particular pointer where that value 9 is stored, and that happens with all identifiers in Python. Integers is one of the most common class types in Python, and we can use the type function to determine the value that identifier holds. In this case, my var holds the value 9, which is an integer. So if I do my type of my var is going to return the class type that this object holds. So the int constructor is basically a function that converts other object types to integers. And we can give an example. So for example, if I do int of 9.22, which in this case is a float value, what that will do is return a representation, basically truncate that number to be represented as an integer. So in that case, it just truncates the value to 9. So it's important to know what it's doing. In this case, if I do 9.9, it's just going to truncate the value to the value 9. It's not going to round it. So the constructor, we can also pass other type of objects. So let's say I want to pass the value of 9, but I want to pass a string. It also will convert that value to an integer type. Floats, on the other hand, are values that contain decimal points. So for example, the value 9.22 is a float value. The float constructor basically converts a value that is not a float to a value that is a float. So for example, if I use a float constructor and pass an integer 9, what that will do is convert that to be a float. And I can also create another variable, let's say 9.34, my bar, and if I check the type of my bar too, that's gonna return that this value memory holds a float. Strings are other class types that are very common. A string is a value that basically we generally consider as letters or words. So for example, if I do this identifier and put the name Peter in there, then if I check the type of object that this identifier holds, it's going to tell me that this is an str, which stands for strings. The constructor for string is just str. So if I pass the value, let's say an integer 9, is going to return it as a string. It's important to note that in Python, just a single quote or double quote works well for strings. The last type that I would like to talk about is Booleans. So Booleans are values that hold, identifier. If an identifier is a Boolean identifier, it can hold the value true, capital T. I can check the type here, bool, or it can be false with, let's say my bar is equal to false, capital F. I check the type of my bar. So those are Boolean values. It's important to know that the Boolean constructor, bool, basically returns the truthiness of an object. And what that really means is that an object will be truthy only if the value that it holds is not a 0 or is not empty. So for example, if I let the value x be equal to 0 and I do the bool constructor of x, it's going to tell me whether that object is a truthy object or is a falsy object. An object will be falsy if it is a 0, if it is value none, or if it contains nothing in there. So basically, if I have anything other than 0 in there, so let's say I assign the value 1 and I check the Boolean constructor for x, it's going to be a truthy value. In other words, the truthiness of that object is going to be true. This is important because sometimes we'll use the truthiness of an object to construct if statements and other conditionals.